Driver Ryan Newman is in the hospital after the fiery crash on the final lap of the Daytona 500. NASCAR Executive Vice President Stephen O'Donnell read a statement from Newman's Roush Racing team.
Ryan Newman is being treated at Halifax Medical Center. He's in serious condition, but doctors have indicated his injuries are non-life-threatening. We appreciate your thoughts and prayers and ask that you respect the privacy of Ryan and his family during this time.
Newman was in the lead when his car was nudged by Ford teammate Ryan Blaney and sent veering into the wall. The car flipped, caught fire, was hit by another car, which tossed him into the air again. Defending champ Denny Hamlin did take the checkered flag, edging out Blaney. A man is dead after getting hit by an Amtrak train in Polk County. Deputies say the man was on the tracks yesterday afternoon in Auburndale when he was struck. The train was carrying over 100 passengers from Miami to New York, but no one on board was hurt. SpaceX has reason to celebrate after a beautiful launch from Cape Canaveral yesterday morning.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition, liftoff.
SpaceX, however, failed to stick the landing of its Falcon 9 rocket. The first stage failed to land on the SpaceX barge, positioned hundreds of miles off the Florida coast. The rocket sent 60 more internet satellites into orbit. A St. Augustine man is accused of burglarizing a multi-million-dollar penthouse owned by the father of pop star Taylor Swift. The property is in St. Petersburg, and police say they have video of Terrence Hoover getting past security through an emergency stairwell. It looks like President Trump raised $10 million this weekend. Donors paid almost $600,000 a couple to attend a fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago. For your Ocala Quick Minute News, 96.3 FM, 1370 AM, The Source.
Hello, I'm Mark Sears with Regency Printing. With over 10 years in the printing business, I know you'll find Regency Printing the place for all your local printing needs. Plus, I have fax services, mailbox rentals, notary service, U.S. mail, pack and ship, all at one convenient location, 2375 Northeast 25th Avenue. Just look for the yellow signs. Regency Printing, 789-6683. That's 789-6683. Regency Printing.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
And good morning. You're listening to AM Ocala Live on WOCA, The Source, 96.3 FM, 1370 AM. And remember, we are streaming live, YouTube Live, WOCA, The Source Radio. And as we're back here, like promised, we have in the studio Miss Sherie Zahn. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Good.
I'm
I always get a little anxious.
actually Dr. Sherie Zahn.
Doctor?
Yeah.
Sherie Zahn. Excellent. Yeah, we can put that in there too. We have her in the studio to talk an interesting little snippet here. The book that she has that she's promoting called Tony's War, book on World War II. This one we were talking a little off air. This is excellent. This is something a little bit different than most people would assume. Just a simple story that's written for somebody who had an adventure in World War II and came back. This is a little different. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, my father died young, too young, in the 1980s. I was living overseas at the time, so I had all his things put in storage. And when I returned to the States, I discovered a box that I'd never seen before, small Army footlocker. And inside of it were 256 letters that he had written to his parents from the day he left for basic training until the day he boarded a troop ship to leave the South Pacific.
Yeah.
They were not the run-of-the-mill, hey folks, I'm fine, everything's good, the chow's good. They were amazing. He was a wonderful writer. He was also an only child, so his parents expected details. They wanted to know exactly what was going on in his life at all times. He was college educated, so that made a difference. That was pretty rare for a GI. And as I read these letters, it's rather an amazing thing getting to know your own father at a time before you were born. You know, you can still recognize a lot of the characteristics, but this was a much younger person. And the first 2 years of his military career, he was stateside. Various military installations. He loved Fort Ord, California. Who wouldn't love California in the 40s? And he seemed to view his Army career as something like Boy Scout camp. You know, we're camping out, it's kind of cold, it's kind of rainy, but we're having a good time. But when he hits a combat zone, he was present at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which was the largest naval battle in the history of the world. There were 200,000 combatants right in this small Philippine Gulf. It must have been horrific. And they had not taken the island of Leyte yet. It was still Japanese controlled. And as soon as he lands, his letters change and they become increasingly dark.
Yeah.
Which is not unusual, I'm sure, for someone in combat. It's like you've stepped off the earth and fallen into hell, I think.
Sure.
And the letters after he hits combat are very moving. There's one letter in particular. He'd been on the Philippines for a few months, and of course he's writing to his parents, so he's not going to say, we're being bombed, we've got snipers trying to kill us, we've got this, that, and the other. So he doesn't mention those things. And apparently on Christmas Eve of 1944, he gets a letter from his father. And in the letter, his father says, well, son, you have not yet experienced war. There's a letter in here, written Christmas Eve, 1944.
Specifically to Dad.
Specifically to Dad, and sent to Dad's office because he didn't want his mother to see this letter.
Absolutely.
And it was quite revealing. Obviously, there was a censor at play, but the censor didn't censor your feelings.
Of course.
Or your emotions.
Right.
Mostly they were censoring location indicators. So there were none of those.
Okay.
So the letter was okay. And then there were subsequent letters that showed, you know, he worked in the Signal Corps. He was assigned to the Signal Corps. And one day he was in the shop repairing communication devices and described in a letter how he went completely berserk and just started breaking things and throwing things. That was not his demeanor normally.
No.
So the letters do reveal a change in character. What is really, to me, most meaningful in this book is that he had come from an upper middle class family. He was educated. He had musical talent. He could have been a Renaissance man. He was an artist. There was nothing he couldn't do. After the war, he blew off all of those things. I never heard him play piano. He'd been a music major in college and aspired to a musical career. Mm-hmm. He didn't touch piano again. He didn't do his artwork anymore. He lived in a dump, a real dump. And if you said anything to him about his living conditions, he'd say, well, I could live in a tent, and I have.
And he has.
So,
yeah.
So he was sort of stuck in time.
Sure.
He was stuck in time for that relatively short time that he was in a war zone.
Yeah.
He never actually left that mentally.
Now, from the times that you were growing up and everything, is what you just described sort of the way that you had gotten to know your dad or just understood him as that way? And what I'm getting at is, as you were saying, and I think that's interesting, is when you're reading or had found the letters and you're getting to know who your dad is before he was your dad, mm-hmm. There's, something there, and then to see that existed as him and his personality before, not knowing that did. Is that something that it didn't exist until you read those letters, or that you knew that there was some compassionate, articulate, creative person there, it just wasn't expressed?
Oh, I knew who was there. There was never any doubt about that.
Yeah.
And my parents were divorced when I was 4. which wasn't surprising in retrospect.
Considering
a lot
how-
of these guys just they can't let go. They have emotional problems. I'm sure my mother had no clue what he had been through and was expecting other things. But he was a wonderful father.
Yeah.
He had been the father to my brother and I, who has since passed, that his parents had been to him. That he was cosmopolitan. He took us, we lived on Long Island, he took us into Manhattan and took us to museums and theater, and he made sure that we saw the world as a big, wonderful place.
Absolutely.
I grew up in the 50s, and back in the 50s, opportunities for women were very limited. You could be a teacher or a nurse or a librarian, things like that, secretary. But my dad always said, you can be anything.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
You just have to work for it. Okay, I've got a PhD and a medical degree. I would never have aspired to that if it were not for him.
That's awesome.
So he was a wonderful dad, but he was an extreme alcoholic.
Sure.
And what's really ironic is in his letters, he's not a drinker. In the military, they got coupons. You got coupons for cigarettes, and you got coupons for beer. He didn't like beer. So he would trade his beer coupons for cigarette coupons. After the war, he was an alcoholic to the degree that on non-work days, when he opened his eyes in the morning, the first thing he would do is go and get a beer. In later years, he was in California, and I was in California, and Artie Shaw was teaching a course at UC Santa Barbara. And I thought, what a great gift for Dad. You know, that's his era of music. He was a music major. Yeah. I'm going to get him, enroll him in this class. But I had the foresight to say to him, Dad, Artie Shaw's teaching a class. Wouldn't you love to go? He said, I can't. And I said, what do you mean? I thought you loved his music. He said, I did. He said, but I can't go that long without a drink.
Oh, wow.
How sad. How incredibly sad.
Yeah.
He was never homeless, but the war had just destroyed this man, really.
Yeah.
He joined the VFW for a while, but was very disappointed that people weren't talking about the war as much as he would have liked. He always had a huge stack of books beside his easy chair, and they were virtually all about World War II, the Pacific Theater especially.
Incredible.
By the way, I should mention this book, Tony's War. I'm devoting this year to traveling around the United States marketing it. Every single penny of profit is going to veterans.
Yeah.
So that's important to me because I didn't write this. He wrote it, and he was a soldier, and the profits should go to soldiers.
And I was telling you a little off air about our studio here, 96.3 FM and 1370 AM, The Source, that we do a segment every Thursday, Vets Helping Vets. And a lot of everything that we discuss in lieu of Vets Helping Vets is to make the awareness of just how hard it is for veterans in the mindset not only to come back from combat to be able to place themselves in regular society, but it's the idea of, sounds like something that hits right on the head with what your dad was going through, is how to adapt yourself to what you had seen, what had transpired in your events, in your experience in the war. And Joe will tell you he doesn't color code it. He says instead of suicide, a pretty word, he says people killing themselves, because it gets to that point where they can't handle certain situations of regular society considering what they've seen. So a lot of what they do at Vets Helping Vets is to let people know, let veterans know that there's options out there for them to talk to somebody and everything. And just in a little bit, we've spoken there a little bit, like you said, with the VFW. It's almost as if your dad was looking for that little bit of conversation to make himself feel better. It's like, man, I wish they would have talked a little bit about what had gone on in the war, just enough to say that he could suffice a little bit of that segment to maybe ease his pain just a moment within a day.
I don't know
or
whether
often.
it would be to ease it or just because he was so immersed in it, just to keep it alive.
Sure. Do you think that in a way, and I just thought about this when when somebody's in that kind of situation, like we said, so World War II, and he was over in the Pacific, you said in the Philippines, and most guys are doing their job, they're doing their duty, but he's taking moments to write and be more articulate with expressing what's going on with the emotion, with detail of the thought process. Do you think that hit or resonated something harder than it would for most soldiers that were there? Because maybe they were just going through the motions and doing what was necessary,
I
what
really
orders were due?
can't say. He was an intellectual, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And he did express repeatedly his surprise with the other soldiers. And
Yeah.
in fact, I think part of what bothered him the most about the war wasn't the conflict with the enemy, it was how the Americans behaved. I think that was a shock to him. He'd been raised in a gentlemanly environment, and he'd never been very far. I mean, he'd never been further west than New Jersey or further north than Boston. So he was in this group of people whose backgrounds were completely foreign to him.
Sure.
And I think he was disappointed in American behavior. In one of the letters to his father, he wrote, "You think we are the good guys? You really think we're the good guys?" And he used to tell me as a child, he'd say, "If you think Americans are the good guys, you look and see how many prisoners we took in New Guinea. 0. We took no prisoners." And he describes some things in the book that happened in the Philippines that horrified him.
Sure.
And it wasn't what the enemy did. It was what we did.
That's what we did.
So I think there are just so many complexities when you're in combat. There are just so many things that are just horrifying. If you weren't a kid who hurt animals when you were young, this was just a foreign way of living. I would like to add also that in one of his later letters, once censorship was lifted, he was able to tell his parents that he was on the island of Leyte and the different towns he'd been stationed in. Last spring, I went to the island of Leyte.
Oh, did you?
And went to each of the towns that he had been stationed in.
Yeah.
And the one that he liked the best, it was a little tiny town called Tigbao, and I couldn't find it on any map, which was ridiculous. He described where it was, and I went to my hotel's desk, and they said, "Oh, Tigbao, yeah," they knew it. But it's such a tiny place, there's not even a proper road leading to it.
Really?
And I realized that there was no expectation anyone there would speak English. So I went to a local museum and did the tour, and at the end I asked the guides, would any of you be interested in being my guide and taking me to Tigbao? And I explained why. And on the webpage, there's a webpage for this book. It's tonyswar.com. And on the webpage, there's a page called Leyte Today. And it is my journal of my experience on that island, and photos embedded and things. It was a remarkable experience walking in his footsteps on this island. And I would also add that he loved the Filipinos. In fact, he showed interest in some Philippine girls, and clearly by his letters, his parents were not thrilled by that. And he lets them have it. He was a man ahead of his time. He said, I know why you're objecting to this friendship, he said, but that will be what ends wars, when people are all intermarried and don't have loyalties to one group or another. That was very far ahead of his time. The United States did not think like that at the time.
At that time, yeah.
But the Filipinos to this day love Americans. If you want to feel appreciated, go to the Philippines on vacation, because they have not forgotten us. In fact, it's a long story. It's explained on the website. But I was giving out oranges one day to some kids in the shanty town of the capital of Leyte. And one little boy said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Well, my father was a soldier here during World War II, and he loved the Filipinos, and they were very good to him. So this is my way of saying thank you." This kid was maybe 10 years old. His jaw dropped, and he said, Your father was here with MacArthur? Now,
Wow.
how many college graduates
Yeah.
in this country do you think
was thinking
know
that.
who General Douglas MacArthur was?
Right.
Probably close to zero.
Right.
But in the Philippines, they have not forgotten. And everywhere I went, Leyte is not a travel destination for
Right. It's
for Americans.
This is, you're not talking resorts. You're talking
Exactly.
off the beaten path, like an Anthony
Exactly.
Bourdain, no reservations type of place. Sure.
So everywhere I went to Palo, which is where MacArthur came ashore, and there's a memorial there. And some people asked me, what are you doing here? Mm-hmm. And I said, my father served here during World War II. Well, it was like I was a Hollywood celebrity. Everyone wanted their picture taken with me. I was the daughter of a war hero as far as they were concerned.
Yeah.
The Americans had saved them from the Japanese. They'll never forget it.
Yeah. Was there any point in growing up that you thought maybe your dad wanted to go back or visit the Philippines himself?
You know, back in those days, travel wasn't that easy, and it was very expensive. And I don't think there was any thought of going back. I think in recent decades maybe, but he died in the 80s, and no, I don't think so.
Yeah, incredible.
But he had loved it there. He really had loved it there.
Yeah.
War aside.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, for those listening, we just got a few minutes left there, Sherie. So, the book is Tony's War, World War II. We're talking, what you said, 256 letters that your father had wrote from the time he started basic training to the time he was on a way home.
And it's got 52 graphics in it, his drawings and photographs that he took.
Yeah.
So, and the graphics are embedded where they belong in the text. I can't stand it when they're all in the middle. And
somewhere like up there they are, but no, they coincide with.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting timeline too. You were saying from the time like he started basic to the time that he was coming home.
Yeah.
And then where you see. And what could you say is the biggest, or how do I put this? Like what can people get out of wanting to read this book? What's the one thing that they can take from it?
Well,
that
there's
would be
more
worth
than
it?
one thing. It's a time capsule. You know,
Okay.
the world in the 1940s, the way people thought, the way people behaved, so different from now. So it's like a snapshot of a lost time.
Yeah.
But also, I think it will help. It will help a lot of people understand why, even today, they know someone or they have a loved one who goes off into the military and goes into combat and comes home a different person than the person who left.
Sure.
I think it kind of shows that transition.
Excellent. Well, the book is Tony's War. Where can they find the book?
It is available online through Barnes & Noble, Amazon. It's available as a print book and an e-book.
There you go, folks. As we come to the top of the hour, it was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to tell people.
Absolutely. This sounds absolutely incredible, and we're talking about, just... it's been quite a few years, but we're coming up on, is it 75 years?
2020 is the 75th anniversary of the end of the war, and I haven't heard very much about it. This is
Fox News.
This was
I'm Chris
timed
Foster.
specifically for that.
Yeah, excellent. We'll be back after this. WOCA, The Source.
New NPR PBS Marist poll, the fourth to have him above 10%.
It shows him with 19% support nationally in the Democratic field, coming in second to Senator Bernie Sanders, who is in the lead at 31%. The Democratic National Committee recently changed its rules for debate qualification, dropping the donation requirement, an important distinction because Bloomberg is not taking donations.
Fox's Tanya J. Powers. The head of the Federal Judges Association calls an emergency meeting about Trump administration intervention in politically sensitive cases.
Judge Cynthia Roof in Philadelphia said 1,000 federal judges called for the meeting to be held today after officials with the Department of Justice essentially recalled a 7 to 9 year sentence recommendation put out by the U.S. Attorney's Office for President Trump's confidant Roger Stone.
Fox's David Spunt. America's listening to Fox News.
My portfolio's diversified, my 401k's maxed, but my savings account just sat there till I switched it to Marcus by Goldman Sachs. I'm earning way more now, and just between you and me, my savings are right on track. Feels like I got upgraded for free.
You can money. With an online savings account from Marcus by Goldman Sachs, you could earn much more interest than with the largest banks. Sign up at Marcus.com.
Comparison made to the 3 largest U.S. banks measured by total deposits.